My name is Jennifer Davis, but everyone calls me Jenny. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent the last 3 decades building something from nothing. What I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about family betrayal. It's about the moment I realized that sometimes the people you sacrifice everything for are the same ones who will look you in the eye and tell you that you're worthless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But here's the thing they didn't know. I had just signed the papers that morning. Their mortgage, their perfect little suburban dream, their financial security, it all belonged to me now. And when my son Marcus sat across from me at that dinner table, his wife Rachel smirking beside him, and told me I was a worthless burden who had never contributed anything meaningful to their lives, I just smiled. Because in about 30 days, they were going to find out exactly how worthless I really was. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand what I built to appreciate what I was about to tear down. 32 years ago, I was a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Marcus was 6 years old, and his father had walked out when he was 3, leaving behind nothing but empty promises and a pile of unpaid bills. I worked at a diner during the day, slinging coffee and eggs to truckers and construction workers who left dollar tips on good days. At night, I cleaned office buildings downtown, pushing a cart through empty hallways, while Marcus slept in the break room, wrapped in a blanket I'd bought from a thrift store. Most nights, I'd get home at 2 in the morning, collapse on our secondhand couch, and wake up 4 hours later to get Marcus ready for school. I'd pack his lunch with whatever we had, sometimes just a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, and walk him to the bus stop before heading to the diner for another shift. But I had a plan. I'd always been good with numbers, and during those quiet hours cleaning offices, I'd study the business magazines left on desks, learn about investments, real estate, market trends. I started small, very small. I'd save every tip, every extra dollar, and put it into a savings account. After 2 years, I had enough to buy my first property, a rundown duplex in a neighborhood most people avoided. I spent weekends fixing it up myself, watching YouTube videos to learn how to tile a bathroom, install a sink, paint walls properly. Marcus would help sometimes, holding tools or painting baseboards. He was so proud when I rented out both sides of the duplex. "Mom, you're like a real estate lady now," he'd say, and I'd ruffle his hair and tell him that someday we'd have a real house, not just a rented apartment. That duplex was the beginning. I reinvested every penny of rental income into the next property, then the next. I learned about tax liens, foreclosure auctions, distressed property. I'd show up to auctions with my carefully saved cash, bidding against investors who wore expensive suits and drove luxury cars. They'd look at me like I didn't belong there, this woman in her thrift store clothes with calloused hands and tired eyes, but I kept winning. Not always, but often enough. I'd buy properties, fix them up, rent them out, and use the income to buy more. By the time Marcus was in high school, I owned 12 rental properties across 3 neighborhoods. I was still working at the diner. I needed the steady income, but I was building something real. Marcus never seemed to notice the sacrifice. When he needed new shoes for basketball, I bought them. When he wanted to go on the senior trip to Washington, D.C., I made sure he had the money. When college applications came around, I'd already started a separate savings account for his education. I never told him about the nights I'd skip dinner to make sure we had enough for his expenses, or the times I'd drive across town to buy groceries at the discount store, so I could stretch our budget. He got into state university with a partial scholarship, and I covered the rest. 4 years of tuition, room and board, textbooks, spending money. I was proud when he graduated with a degree in business administration. He moved back home for a few months, and I thought maybe we'd work together. I'd built this portfolio of properties, and he had the education to help me expand it. But Marcus had other plans. He'd met Rachel during his senior year, and they were talking about getting married. She came from money, her parents owned a chain of furniture stores, and she made it clear that she didn't think much of our modest lifestyle. I remember the first time she came to dinner at our house. She looked around our small kitchen, at the mismatched chairs, and the refrigerator covered with Marcus's old school photos, and said, "It's so quaint how you've kept everything exactly the same." It wasn't a compliment. Marcus defended me then, told Rachel that I'd worked hard to give him opportunities, that I'd built something from nothing. But I could see the way she looked at him when he said it. Like she was disappointed in him for not being embarrassed by his background. They got married 6 months after graduation. I paid for the wedding, even though Rachel's parents had offered. I wanted to contribute, to show that I could provide for my son's important moments. The reception was at a country club I'd driven past hundreds of times, but never imagined I'd enter. I wore the best dress I owned, bought specially for the occasion, and I felt proud watching Marcus dance with his new wife. But something changed after the wedding. Marcus got a job at a marketing firm, and he and Rachel moved into a small apartment across town. I'd call to check in, maybe suggest dinner, but he was always busy. Rachel was working at her parents' store, and they were saving for a house. I offered to help with the down payment, but Marcus said they wanted to do it themselves. I respected that. I understood the pride of wanting to build something on your own, so I focused on my own work, expanding my property portfolio, watching my investments grow. By the time Marcus turned 30, I owned 26 properties across 4 neighborhoods. I'd quit the diner years earlier and was managing my real estate full-time, but I'd never stopped living modestly. I still drove the same Honda Civic I'd bought used 10 years earlier, still shopped at discount stores, still lived in the same small house I'd bought when Marcus was in high school. That's when I got the call that changed everything. Marcus phoned me on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over for dinner this weekend? There's something important we need to discuss." I said yes, of course. I always said yes when Marcus needed something. I brought flowers for Rachel and a bottle of wine I'd picked up at the grocery store. Their house was beautiful, a 2-story colonial in a development called Meadowbrook Estate. They'd been living there for 3 years, and every time I visited, I noticed new improvements: a deck in the backyard, upgraded appliances, new furniture in the living room. Rachel met me at the door, and her smile seemed forced. "Jenny, so good to see you. Come in. Come in." Marcus is in the kitchen. I followed her through the house, admiring the hardwood floors and the crown molding, the family photos arranged on the mantel. Marcus was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot. He turned when I entered, and I could see the tension in his shoulder. "Hey, Mom. Thanks for coming over." "Of course, honey. Something smells wonderful." We sat down to dinner, and for the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. Rachel talked about her job, Marcus mentioned a project at work, but I could feel the undercurrent of anxiety, the way they kept glancing at each other like they were waiting for a signal. Finally, Marcus put down his fork and looked at me directly. "Mom, we need to talk about something serious. Rachel and I have been discussing our future, and we've realized we're in a difficult position." "What kind of position?" Rachel leaned forward, her expression serious. "We're struggling financially, Jenny. The mortgage payments are becoming unmanageable, and we're worried about foreclosure." I felt my heart skip. Foreclosure? But Marcus, you both have good jobs. How long has this been going on? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "A couple of years. We've been managing, but barely. Rachel's hours got cut at the store, and I haven't gotten a raise in 3 years. We've been using credit cards to cover the shortfall, and now we're drowning in debt." I reached across the table, wanting to comfort him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I could have helped." That's when something in Rachel's expression changed. She sat back in her chair, her arms crossed. "That's exactly the problem, Jenny. You always want to help, but you never actually do anything meaningful. You just throw money at problems and expect that to fix everything." I blinked, confused. "I don't understand." Marcus looked at his wife, then back at me. "Mom, we've been talking about this for months. You've always been there with small amounts of money when we needed it, but you've never really supported us in building something substantial. You've never invested in our future. I paid for your education. I paid for your wedding. I've helped with car repairs, medical bills, pocket change." Rachel interrupted. "You claim to be this successful real estate investor, but you still live in that tiny house, drive that old car. If you really cared about Marcus's future, you'd be helping us in a meaningful way. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. What are you asking me to do? Marcus took a deep breath. We need you to co-sign on a loan consolidation. It would allow us to restructure our debt and keep the house. With your credit and your assets, we could get a lower interest rate, manageable payments. How much debt are we talking about? About 150,000, Rachel said quickly, but with the consolidation, we could handle it. I sat back, processed $150,000 in debt, on top of their mortgage. Marcus, how did you accumulate that much debt? It wasn't intentional, he said defensively. Things just got expensive. The house needed work. We wanted to live comfortably. Rachel needed a reliable car for work. It added up. I looked around the dining room, at the expensive light fixture, the custom window treatments, the artwork on the walls. You've been living beyond your means. Rachel's face flushed. We've been living the life we deserve, Jenny. Some of us have higher standards than others. The words hit me like a slap. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife that she was out of line, but Marcus just stared at his plate, saying nothing. I need to think about this, I said quietly. It's a big decision. There's nothing to think about, Rachel snapped. Either you care about your son's future, or you don't. Either you're willing to help him build something meaningful, or you're just gonna keep pretending that your little landlord hobby makes you some kind of successful businesswoman. I felt my cheeks burn. Rachel, I've worked very hard to build what I have. I've been responsible with my money, and I've always helped Marcus when he needed it. Have you? She said, leaning forward. Because from where I sit, you've been selfish. You've hoarded your money, lived like a miser, and watched your son struggle while you pretended to be some kind of real estate mogul. You own a bunch of rundown properties in bad neighborhoods, and you think that makes you successful. But you've never actually done anything meaningful with your money. You've never invested in the people who matter. Marcus finally looked up. Mom, I know this is hard to hear, but Rachel has a point. You've always been so focused on saving money, on building your little empire, that you've never really thought about what I might need. You've never asked how you could help me build something significant. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, and I felt something break inside me. I've given you everything I had, Marcus. I worked 2 jobs to put you through school. I went without so you could have what you need. I've helped you with every crisis, every unexpected expense. Small amounts, Rachel said dismissively. $20 here, $50 there, a few hundred for a car repair. That's not real support, Jenny. That's just guilt money. What are you saying? Marcus reached across the table, his expression serious. Mom, I'm saying that if you really want to help me, if you really want to prove that you care about my future, you'll co-sign this loan. You'll put your assets on the line for me the way a real mother would. I felt the room spin. And if I don't, Rachel smiled, but it wasn't warm. Then I guess we'll know where we stand, won't we? We'll know that all these years of you claiming to be a supportive mother were just words. We'll know that when it really mattered, when Marcus needed you most, you chose your precious money over your son. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to tell his wife that she was wrong, that she was being unfair. But he just nodded slowly. She's right, Mom. This is the moment that matters. This is when you can actually prove that you care about me more than your bank account. I sat there in silence, my mind reeling. These people, my son and his wife, were asking me to risk everything I'd built. They were asking me to guarantee their debt, to put my properties, my security, my future on the line to bail them out of their irresponsible spending. And they were telling me that if I didn't, I was a worthless mother who had never really loved my son. I need time to think, I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel laughed, a harsh sound. Time to think. Marcus, your mother is sitting here, in our house, looking at our situation, and she needs time to think about whether she loves you enough to help you. Do you see what I mean? Do you see what kind of person she really is? Something in her tone, the cruelty of it made me look up. What kind of person do you think I am, Rachel? I think you're selfish, she said without hesitation. I think you've spent so many years hoarding money, and playing small-time landlord, that you've forgotten what it means to be a mother. I think you like the idea of being successful more than you actually care about your son's happiness. I turned to Marcus. Is that what you think? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with his answer. Finally, he said, I think you've always been more concerned with your own security than with helping me build something meaningful. I think you've used your money as a way to control our relationship, giving me just enough to keep me dependent, but never enough to actually change my situation. The words cut deep, deeper than I'd expected. I'd spent 30 years building something, sacrificing everything for this man, and he was telling me that I'd been selfish, controlling, that I'd never really cared about his future. I've never tried to control you, Marcus. I've tried to help you whenever you needed it. Have you? Rachel said, because from where I sit, you've been manipulating him his whole life, giving him just enough money to solve immediate problems, but never enough to build real wealth, keeping him financially dependent on you so he'd always need his mommy. That's not true, isn't? Marcus said quietly. Mom, you've never offered to help me invest in anything significant. You've never suggested we work together on a real estate deal. You've never tried to teach me how to build wealth the way you have. You've just given me handouts when I was desperate. I felt tears forming in my eyes. I thought I was helping you be independent. I thought I was teaching you to be responsible by watching me struggle, Rachel said, by sitting on your pile of money while your son worked entry-level jobs and worried about paying rent. That's not teaching responsibility, Jenny. That's just being cheap. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I think I should go. Of course you should, Rachel said. Run away, just like you always do when things get difficult. Don't actually commit to helping your son when he needs you most. I grabbed my purse, my hands shaking. I'll call you tomorrow, Marcus. We can talk about this when emotions aren't so high. As I walked toward the door, I heard Rachel say to Marcus, do you see? She's not even going to give you an answer. She's just going to disappear and hope this goes away. I stopped at the door, my hand on the knob. I turned back to look at them, my son and his wife, sitting at their expensive dining table in their beautiful house, looking at me like I was a disappointment. I've spent 30 years building something from nothing, I said quietly. I've worked harder than most people ever will, and I've never asked for anything in return. I've helped you whenever you needed it, Marcus, and I've never made you feel bad about asking. But you're both sitting here telling me that I'm worthless, that I've never really cared about you, that I'm selfish and controlling. Because it's true, Rachel said simply. I nodded slowly. Okay, I'll give you an answer tomorrow. I left their house and drove home in silence, my mind spinning with everything they'd said. When I got to my small house, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the front door, trying to process what had just happened. My son, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, had just told me that I was worthless. His wife had called me selfish, manipulative, cheap. They'd demanded that I risk everything I'd built to bail them out of their own poor financial decisions. And when I'd asked for time to think, they'd attacked my character, my love for my son, my worth as a mother. But here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known. That morning, before I'd gone to their house for dinner, I'd been at the courthouse, signing paper. I'd been tracking the foreclosure proceedings on their house for 6 weeks, ever since I'd seen the notice in the legal advertisement section of the newspaper. Meadowbrook Estates, 20. The house where my son and his wife lived. The house they were so worried about losing. The house they'd begged me to help them save. I'd bought it at auction that morning for $63,000, cash. They were about to lose their house anyway. The foreclosure was already in motion, and their mortgage company had been trying to work with them for months. They'd missed 7 payments, and their debt was far worse than they'd admitted to me. But now, instead of losing their house to the bank, they were going to lose it to me. I sat in my car, thinking about everything they'd said, about how they'd made me feel, about the way they'd dismissed 30 years of my hard work and sacrifice. I thought about Rachel's cruel smile, about Marcus's betrayal, about the way they'd both looked at me like I was something pathetic. And I started to plan, because if they thought I was worthless, if they thought I was just a selfish old woman who'd never done anything meaningful, then I was going to show them exactly how worthless I really was. I was going to show them what happened when you bite the hand that feeds you. I was going to show them what I'd really built, and what I could really do. The next morning, I called Marcus. My voice was calm, measured, giving nothing away. I've thought about what you and Rachel said last night. I told him, you're right. I haven't been the mother you deserve. I haven't really invested in your future the way I should have. Mom, I'm glad you understand. I was worried that I understand. Completely, I said. I understand that you both think I'm worthless, that I've been selfish, that I've never really cared about your success, and you know what? You're absolutely right. There was a pause. What do you mean? I mean that I'm not going to co-sign your loan, Marcus. I'm not going to risk my assets to bail you out of your poor financial decisions, because you're right. I am selfish. I care more about my own security than about your problems. Mom, wait. No, you were very clear last night. You and Rachel made it perfectly clear what you think of me, what you think I'm worth. So I'm going to live up to your expectation. I'm going to be exactly as worthless as you think I am. Mom, please, let's talk about this. Maybe we can work something out. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Oh, we're going to work something out, Marcus, just not the way you expected. I hung up and spent the rest of the day preparing for what was coming next, because in 27 days, when their grace period expired, Marcus and Rachel were going to discover that their mortgage had been sold to a new owner, and that new owner was going to be very interested in collecting what they owed, or in finding new tenants for 208047 Maple Ridge Drive. I'd spent 30 years building an empire. I'd started with nothing, worked 2 jobs, sacrificed everything for my son. I'd been careful, responsible, strategic. I'd built something substantial, something that could provide security for decades to come, and my son had just told me it was worthless. Well, he was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. The next few days passed in a strange haze of normalcy. I went about my regular routine, collecting rent from my tenants, reviewing maintenance requests, meeting with my property manager about a roof repair on one of my duplexes. But underneath the surface, I was planning something I'd never done before. I was preparing to use my business empire not to build, but to dismantle. Marcus called me twice that week, his voice increasingly strained. The first call came on Thursday morning while I was having coffee and reviewing the legal documents from the foreclosure auction. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot the other night. Rachel and I were stressed, and we probably said some things we didn't mean. I set down my coffee cup carefully. What things didn't you mean, Marcus? There was a pause. Well, you know, some of the harsh words. We're just scared about losing the house, and we took it out on you. I see. So when Rachel called me selfish and said I was worthless, that was just stress talking. Mom, please, can we start over? Can you come over this weekend so we can discuss this calmly? I almost laughed. He wanted to start over now that he realized I wasn't going to cave immediately to his demands. Marcus, I need you to understand something very clearly. The other night you and your wife told me exactly what you think of me. You told me I'm selfish, that I've never really supported you, that I've been manipulative and controlling. Those weren't words spoken in anger. Those were your honest feelings, finally expressed. That's not true, Mom. I love you. I've always appreciated everything you've done for me. Have you? Because from where I sit, it seems like you've been building resentment for years. And Rachel just gave you permission to finally voice it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We're going to lose the house, Mom. The bank is foreclosing. We have less than a month." "I know," I said simply. "You know? How do you know?" I could have told him then about the auction, about the papers sitting on my kitchen table with my signature on them. But I wasn't ready yet. "I know because I pay attention, Marcus. I know because when someone tells me they're facing foreclosure, I listen. Then help us. Please. We can work out the details of the loan later. But right now we just need to stop the foreclosure." "The foreclosure can't be stopped, Marcus. It's already happened." "What do you mean?" "I mean the house was sold at auction 3 days ago. It's done." I heard what sounded like the phone dropping, then muffled voices. Rachel had grabbed the phone. "Jenny, what are you talking about? We would have been notified if the house was sold." You were notified. You received multiple notices over the past 2 months. You chose to ignore them because you thought you could manipulate me into bailing you out. That's not. We were trying to work with the bank. They said we had time to arrange financing. They gave you time. You didn't use it wisely. Rachel's voice turned sharp. You knew this was happening, and you didn't tell us. What kind of mother are you? I'm the kind of mother who pays attention to public records. The kind who knows that foreclosure proceedings are published in the newspaper. The kind who assumes that grown adults are capable of managing their own financial affairs. You could have warned us. You could have been honest with me about how bad things really were. You could have asked for help before you were 7 months behind on your mortgage. You could have approached me with respect instead of attacking my character and demanding that I risk everything I've worked for. Marcus got back on the phone. Mom, please. If the house has been sold, we need to find somewhere to live. Can you help us find a rental? Maybe one of your property. Now I did laugh, though there was no humor in it. You want to rent from me? The same woman you called worthless 3 days ago. We were upset. We didn't mean it. You meant every word, Marcus. And now you're facing the consequences of your choice. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, staring at the legal documents. The house at 2047 Maple Ridge Drive now belonged to me. Free and clear. I'd paid cash, so there was no mortgage, no monthly payment. I could rent it out for enough to cover the property taxes and insurance, and still make a substantial profit. Or I could sell it, and probably double my investment within a year. But I wasn't thinking about profit. I was thinking about justice. The second call came on Saturday evening. This time, Marcus sounded desperate. Mom, we got the eviction notice today. The new owner is giving us 30 days to vacate. We don't know who bought the house, but they're not interested in working with us. We've been calling real estate agents all day, and everything in our price range is either taken or in terrible condition. What's your price range? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We can afford maybe $1,200 a month, $13 at most, but everything decent starts at $1,800, and most landlords want first month, last month, and a security deposit up front. We don't have that kind of cash. I pulled out a notepad and started writing down numbers. What about moving somewhere less expensive? Maybe a smaller house, a different neighborhood. Rachel doesn't want to move somewhere cheaper. She says we have a certain standard of living to maintain. Of course she did. Rachel, who had called me cheap and selfish, didn't want to lower her standards even when facing homelessness. Marcus, let me ask you something. When you and Rachel were planning your finances, when you were deciding how much house you could afford, did you consider what would happen if one of you lost your job or took a pay cut? We thought we'd figure it out as we went along. You thought you'd figure it out. You took on a mortgage you couldn't afford. You accumulated credit card debt for luxury purchases, and you thought you'd figure it out. Everyone does that, Mom. Everyone stretches a little to get the house they want. No, Mark. Responsible people buy houses they can afford. Responsible people save for emergencies. Responsible people don't accumulate $150,000 in credit card debt. We weren't trying to be irresponsible. We just wanted to live comfortably. You wanted to live above your means. There's a difference. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom, I know you're angry with us. I know we hurt your feelings the other night. But we're your family. We need help. Family. I repeated the word slowly. Tell me, Marcus, when you and Rachel were discussing your financial problems, when you were planning to ask me for help, did you talk about me like family? What do you mean? I mean, did you say things like my mother loves me and wants to help? Or my mother has worked hard and deserves our respect? Or did you say things like my mother is a pushover, and we can guilt her into co-signing for us? Marcus didn't answer, because from where I sit, it seems like you and Rachel spent a lot of time planning how to manipulate me. You invited me to dinner. You presented a united front. You attacked my character when I hesitated. That doesn't sound like family asking for help. That sounds like predators targeting a victim. That's not fair, Mom. Isn't it? Rachel called me worthless. Marcus? She said I'd never done anything meaningful for you. She said I was selfish and manipulative. And you sat there and agreed with her. You nodded along while your wife attacked the woman who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you, who worked 2 jobs to put you through college. We were stressed. You were cruel. There's a difference. I could hear muffled voices in the background. Rachel saying something to Marcus. Then he came back on the line. Mom! Rachel wants to apologize. She admits she went too far the other night. Put her on the phone. There was a pause. Then Rachel's voice carefully controlled. Jenny! I owe you an apology. I was out of line the other night. I said things I didn't mean because I was scared about losing the house. What specifically did you say that you didn't mean? Another pause. I shouldn't have called you selfish. What else? I shouldn't have said you'd never supported Marcus. What else, Rachel? I don't remember everything I said. I was upset. You said I was worthless. You said I'd never done anything meaningful. You said I was manipulative and controlling. You said I lived like a miser and that my real estate business was just a hobby. You said I cared more about money than about my son's happiness. Silence. Do you remember now? I was wrong to say those things. Were you wrong to say them? Or were you wrong to say them out loud? I don't understand. I'm asking whether you actually believe those things about me, and you just regret expressing them, or whether you genuinely think you were mistaken. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think I was frustrated because you have the ability to help us, and you seem reluctant to do so. That's not an answer to my question. Jenny, I don't want to fight with you. I just want to find a way forward. The way forward is very simple, Rach. You and Marcus are going to live with the consequences of your choices. You're going to lose your house because you couldn't afford it. You're going to have to find somewhere else to live within your actual budget. You're going to have to learn to live within your means, and you're not going to help us at all. I'm going to help you exactly as much as you deserve. I hung up and poured myself a glass of wine. Outside it was getting dark and I could see the lights coming on in my neighbor's house. Normal people living normal lives. Working within their means. Taking care of their responsibilities. I thought about the house at 28047 Maple Ridge Drive. Sitting empty except for Marcus and Rachel's possession. In 30 days, they'd be gone. And I'd have a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in an upscale neighborhood. I could rent it to a nice family. People who would appreciate living there, who would take care of the property and pay their rent on time. But first I had some research to do. Over the next week, I made a project of learning everything I could about Marcus and Rachel's financial situation. It wasn't difficult. Public records are easily accessible if you know where to look. And I'd been researching properties and financial backgrounds for years. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The credit card debt wasn't just from living expenses and home improvements. Rachel had been shopping compulsively for years, accumulating designer clothes, expensive jewelry, luxury handbags. She'd spent $8,000 at a single boutique in the past year, $12,000 at various spas and salons, $3,000 on a purse. Marcus wasn't innocent either. He'd been spending money on toys for grown men. A motorcycle he'd financed for $15,000. A boat he'd bought and sold within 6 months. Losing money on both transactions. High-end electronics. Expensive dinners. A golf club membership he couldn't afford. They'd been living like millionaires on a middle-class income. And when the bills came due, they'd decided that I should pay them. But the most interesting discovery was Rachel's social media presence. She'd been posting photos of their lifestyle for years. The beautiful house, the expensive vacations, the designer purchases. But more revealing were the comments she'd made about me. In a post from 6 months ago, showing off a new diamond bracelet, someone had commented asking if it was a gift. Rachel had responded, Marcus's mom has money, but she's too cheap to spend it on anyone but herself. Had to treat myself since she won't. In another post, showing their renovated kitchen. Someone had asked, "Who did the work?" Rachel had written, "We did it ourselves because Marcus's mom thinks home improvement is a waste of money. She lives like she's poor even though she owns half the rental properties in town." And in a post from just 2 weeks before our disastrous dinner, Rachel had shared a meme about entitled parents with the caption, "Some people think that just because they raised you, you owe them something forever." Newsflash: doing the bare minimum as a parent doesn't make you a saint. I printed out screenshots of all of it and put them in a folder, evidence of their true feelings, their real attitudes, their complete lack of respect for everything I'd sacrificed for them. But the most damning discovery came when I looked into their employment history. Marcus had been telling me for months that he hadn't gotten a raise in 3 years, that his company was struggling. But according to public records, he'd actually received 2 promotions and a significant salary increase in the past 18 months. His current income was nearly double what he'd been making when they bought the house. Rachel's story about her hours being cut was also false. According to her social media posts and the store's employee newsletter that I found online, she'd actually been promoted to assistant manager 6 months ago, with a substantial pay increase. They weren't struggling because of economic circumstances. They were struggling because they'd chosen to spend money they didn't have on things they didn't need. And when the bills came due, instead of cutting back on their lifestyle, they'd decided to lie to me and manipulate me into paying for their mistake. I sat in my home office, surrounded by printouts and documents, feeling a cold anger settle in my chest. These people had looked me in the eye and lied to me. They'd attacked my character, dismissed my sacrifices, and demanded that I risk everything I'd worked for to enable their continued irresponsibility. And they'd been planning it for months. The phone rang again on Tuesday morning. This time it was Marcus, and he sounded panicked. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you meet us for coffee? There's something we need to discuss." "I think we've discussed everything we need to discuss, Marcus. Please, just give us one more chance to explain." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them at a coffee shop near their house. When I arrived, they were already there, sitting at a corner table. Rachel looked like she'd been crying, and Marcus looked exhausted. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said as I sat down. "We know you're angry with us, and we understand why. Do you?" Rachel leaned forward. "Jenny, I've been thinking a lot about what I said the other night, and I realize I was completely out of line. I was scared and frustrated, and I took it out on you. But that's no excuse for attacking someone who's been nothing but generous and supportive." I studied her face, looking for signs of sincerity. "What made you realize this, Rachel?" "I've been talking to my therapist about it. She helped me see that I was projecting my own insecurities onto you." "Your therapist?" I nodded slowly. "How much does therapy cost, Rachel?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. What do you mean?" "I mean, you and Marcus are supposedly facing foreclosure. You claim you can't afford your mortgage payments, but you're paying for therapy. I'm curious about the cost." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, that's not really relevant, isn't it? You're asking me to risk my financial security because you can't manage your money, but you're spending money on therapy instead of mortgage payments. It seems very relevant to me." Rachel's composure slipped slightly. "Therapy is important for my mental health." "How much, Rachel?" $150 a session. "How often do you go?" "Twice a week." I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator app. "So you spend $1,200 a month on therapy." "Mental health is important," Marcus said defensively. "I agree. Mental health is very important. So is financial responsibility." I looked at them both. "You spend more on therapy than most people spend on rent, but you want me to believe you can't afford your mortgage." Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. "That's different. Therapy is an investment in my well-being, and mortgage payments are an investment in having a place to live. Which seems more essential to you?" "You're twisting things around," Marcus said. "You're making it sound like we're frivolous with money." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. I opened it and spread some of the printouts on the table between us. Credit card statements, social media posts, receipts from luxury purchase. $8,000 at designer boutiques this year, I said, pointing to one statement. 12,000 at spas and salons, 3,000 on a single purse, 15,000 on a motorcycle you owned for 4 months. Marcus stared at the papers. Where did you get these? Public records, social media. It's amazing what people share online when they think no one is paying attention. Rachel grabbed one of the printouts. You've been spying on us. I've been researching you, the same way I research any potential investment. And what I've found is that you've been lying to me about your financial situation. I pulled out another sheet. Marcus, you told me you haven't had a raise in 3 years, but according to your company's newsletter, you've been promoted twice in the past 18 months, and your salary has increased by 40%. Marcus's face went pale. How did you? Rachel, you told me your hours were cut at the furniture store, but your own social media posts show that you were promoted to assistant manager 6 months ago. Rachel stood up abruptly. This is insane. You're stalking us. I'm protecting myself. You see, when someone asks me to co-sign a loan for $150,000, I do my due diligence. I research their financial history, their spending habits, their honesty, and what I've discovered is that you're both lying. Marcus looked around the coffee shop, clearly embarrassed that other people might overhear. Mom, can we please discuss this privately? We are discussing it privately, Marcus, but if you're uncomfortable, we can leave. You don't understand, Rachel said, sitting back down. We had to maintain our lifestyle, our friends, our social circle. We couldn't just suddenly start living like we were poor. Poor. I repeated the word slowly. You think living within your means is living poor. We have a certain image to maintain, Marcus. Our careers, our social connections, they all depend on appearing successful. Appearing successful. I nodded. So you've been spending money. You don't have to maintain an image of success. And when that became unsustainable, you decided that I should pay for it. We thought you'd want to help, Rachel said. We thought family was important to you. Family is important to me, but so is honesty. So is responsibility. So is respect. I gathered up the papers and put them back in the folder. You've shown me that you have none of those qualities. What are you saying? Marcus asked. I'm saying that I know who you really are now. I know what you think of me, what you think you're entitled to, what you're willing to do to get it, and I'm done pretending that you're the people I thought you were. I stood up and put on my coat. In 3 weeks you're going to lose your house. You're going to have to find somewhere else to live, somewhere you can actually afford. You're going to have to learn to live within your means, to be honest about your finances, to take responsibility for your choices. Mom, please, Marcus said. Don't leave like this. I'm not leaving, Marcus. I'm done. There's a difference. I walked out of the coffee shop and got in my car. As I drove away, I could see them through the window arguing with each other, probably blaming each other for how badly things had gone. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about the future, about what I was going to do with the beautiful house at 20. A chapter where I didn't have to worry about being manipulated, lied to, or taken advantage of. A chapter where I could finally live for myself. The next morning, I called my attorney and asked him to prepare eviction papers for the tenants at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. They had 3 weeks left on their notice period, but I wanted everything ready to go. Because Marcus and Rachel had taught me something valuable in that coffee shop. They'd shown me that they were never going to change, never going to take responsibility, never going to treat me with respect, and I'd finally learned to listen. The eviction papers were ready within 48 hours. My attorney, Harold Brennan, had been handling my real estate transactions for 15 years, and he understood the urgency of the situation. When I walked into his office that Thursday morning, he had everything prepared in a manila envelope. Are you sure about this, Jenny? Harold asked, sliding the papers across his desk. This is your son we're talking about. I picked up the envelope and felt its weight. Inside were legal documents that would force Marcus and Rachel out of their home, documents that would make me the villain in their story, documents that would probably end any relationship I had left with my son. Harold, let me ask you something. If a tenant had lied to you about their income, accumulated massive debt while living in your property, and then demanded that you co-sign additional loans to cover their irresponsible spending, what would you do? I'd evict them immediately. Then you understand why Harold nodded slowly. When do you want these served? Tomorrow morning. I want them to have the full legal notice period, but I also want them to understand that this situation has moved beyond family drama. This is business now. I left Harold's office and drove to the house at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. It was strange, seeing it from the outside knowing that I owned it. The property looked beautiful. Rachel had been right about one thing. They'd maintained it well. The landscaping was immaculate. The exterior paint was fresh. The driveway had been recently sealed. They'd put money and effort into creating the perfect image of suburban success. Too bad they'd forgotten to actually pay for it. I parked across the street and watched the house for a few minutes. Rachel's car was in the driveway, a luxury SUV that probably cost more per month than most people paid in rent. Through the front window I could see her moving around inside, probably getting ready for another day of maintaining her lifestyle while facing financial ruin. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. Mom, can we please talk? I know you're angry, but we need to find a solution. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. The solution is very simple. Marcus, accept responsibility for your choices and face the consequences. His response came immediately. What does that mean? It means you're about to find out. I put my phone away and drove home. I had preparations to make for what was coming next, because I knew that once Marcus and Rachel received those eviction papers, they were going to escalate their manipulation attempts. They were going to try guilt, anger, threats, promises, anything to avoid facing the reality of their situation. But I was ready for them now. I'd spent weeks documenting their lies, their spending, their real attitudes toward me. I had evidence of everything, and I was prepared to use it. The next morning, I hired a professional process server to deliver the eviction papers. I wanted everything done legally and properly, with no room for them to claim they hadn't been notified or that the process was improper. At exactly 10:30 a.m., I received a call from the process server confirming that the documents had been delivered to Rachel Bell. My phone started ringing 12 minutes later. Mom, what the hell is this? Marcus's voice was shaking with rage. Someone just served us with eviction papers. They say we have to be out in 3 weeks. I'm aware of the timeline, Marcus. You're aware? What does that mean? It means I know exactly when you have to vacate the property. There was a long silence. Then Marcus said, very quietly, Mom, do you know who bought our house? I do. Who was it? It was me, Marcus. I bought your house at the foreclosure auction. The silence stretched longer this time. I could hear muffled voices in the background, Rachel saying something I couldn't make out. Then Marcus came back on the line. You bought our house? I bought the house that you couldn't afford, that you stopped making payments on, that was sold at public auction because of your financial irresponsibility. Yes. I don't understand. Why would you do that? I did it because it was a good investment. A 4-bedroom colonial in Meadowbrook Estates, purchased below market value, with excellent rental potential. It made perfect business sense. But we live here. Not for much longer. I could hear Rachel in the background, her voice getting louder and more agitated. Then she grabbed the phone. Jenny, this is insane. You can't evict us from our own home. It's not your home, Rachel. It's my property now. You're tenants. And you're being evicted for non-payment of rent. Non-payment of rent. We don't owe you any rent. Actually, You do. As of today, you owe me fair market rent for the time you've been occupying my property without a lease agreement. That comes to about $1,800, which is due immediately. This is crazy. You can't do this to family. I'm not doing this to family, Rachel. I'm doing this to tenants who have no legal right to occupy my property. Marcus got back on the phone. Mom, please, let's sit down and work this out. There has to be a solution that works for everyone. There is a solution, Mark. You move out by the date specified in the eviction notice, and we avoid a lengthy legal battle that will cost you money you don't have and result in an eviction on your credit report. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my problem. You had months to figure out alternative housing. You chose to spend that time lying to me and planning to manipulate me instead of taking responsibility for your situation. We can't just be homeless. You won't be homeless if you find somewhere else to live. There are plenty of rental properties available within your actual budget. Our actual budget. Rachel had grabbed the phone again. Our actual budget won't get us anything decent. Everything affordable is in terrible neighborhoods or falling apart. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you spent $50,000 on luxury purchases this year. Those weren't luxury purchases. Those were necessary expenses. A $3,000 purse is a necessary expense. I need to look professional for work. Rachel, I've been working for 35 years, and I've never owned a purse that cost more than $50. I've somehow managed to maintain a professional appearance without spending more on accessories than most people make in a month. That's different. You don't understand the pressures I'm under. The pressure you're under is entirely self-created. You chose to live beyond your means. You chose to prioritize image over financial stability. You chose to accumulate debt instead of living responsibly. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices. Marcus took the phone back. Mom, I'm begging you. Please don't do this. We're your family. Marcus, for the past month, you and your wife have made it very clear what you think of me. You've called me worthless, selfish, manipulative. You've lied to me about your financial situation. You've demanded that I risk everything I've worked for to bail you out of problems you created. That's not how family treats each other. We were desperate. We said things we didn't mean. You meant every word. And even if you didn't, the fact that you thought those things about me, that you were willing to say them to manipulate me, tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. So you're going to make us homeless out of spite. I'm going to enforce my property rights as a landlord. This isn't about spite, Marcus. This is about consequences. I hung up and immediately turned off my phone. I knew they would call back repeatedly, becoming more desperate and more manipulative with each conversation. But I was done talking. Everything that needed to be said had been said. I spent the rest of the day organizing my files and preparing for what I knew would be a difficult few weeks. I called my property manager and asked him to drive by the house periodically to make sure they weren't damaging anything out of anger. I contacted my insurance company to make sure I was covered if they decided to cause problems. I even spoke with Harold about getting a restraining order if they became threatening, because I knew Marcus and Rachel well enough to know that they wouldn't accept this quietly. They would escalate. They would get ugly, and they would try everything they could think of to force me to change my mind. I was right. The harassment started that evening. When I turned my phone back on at 6 p.m., I had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. The messages started out pleading and quickly devolved into anger and threats. Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. That was the first one. By the 10th message, the tone had changed. I can't believe you're doing this to us. This is the most selfish thing I've ever seen. The 15th message was from Rachel. You're going to regret this, Jenny. You're going to lose your son forever. The final message, sent just an hour earlier, was pure venom. I hope you're happy living alone in your pathetic little house while your own son is homeless. You're exactly the bitter, vindictive woman I always knew you were. I saved all of the messages and forwarded them to Harold. Evidence of harassment, in case I needed it later. The next morning, I found them waiting for me in my driveway when I left for work. Marcus was leaning against my car, and Rachel was standing by my front door. They both looked like they hadn't slept. "Mom, we need to talk," Marcus said, as I approached. "We've talked enough, Marcus. You need to leave my property. Not until you agree to work with us on this." I pulled out my phone. "If you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police." "The police?" Rachel laughed bitterly. "You're going to have your own son arrested. I'm going to have trespassers removed from my property." Marcus stepped away from my car. "Fine, but this isn't over, Mom. We're not just going to disappear because you've decided to be vindictive." "I'm not being vindictive, Marcus. I'm being practical. You can't afford the house you're living in, so you need to find somewhere you can afford. It's very simple." "Simple?" Rachel stepped closer to me, her voice rising. "You think destroying your son's life is simple? I'm not destroying anything. I'm refusing to enable your irresponsible behavior by making us homeless, by refusing to subsidize your lifestyle choices." Several of my neighbors had come outside, drawn by the raised voices. Mrs. Patterson from next door was watering her flowers, but clearly listening to every word. The young couple across the street had stopped loading their car to watch the drama unfold. Rachel noticed the audience and seemed to realize she could use it. She turned toward Mrs. Patterson and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Can you believe this? Jenny is evicting her own son from his home, her own family." Miss Patterson looked uncomfortable and went back inside her house. Marcus grabbed Rachel's arm. "Come on, this isn't helping." "No," Rachel shook him off. "Everyone should know what kind of person she really is. She's a landlord who cares more about money than her own son." "Rachel, stop," Marcus said urgently. But Rachel was beyond reason now. She turned to the couple across the street. "Did you know that Jenny owns half the rental properties in this neighborhood? Did you know she's been hoarding money for decades while her son struggled to make ends meet, and now she's throwing him out on the street?" The couple hurried into their house and closed the door. I looked at Marcus. "Get her under control or I'm calling the police right now." "Rachel, we're leaving," Marcus said firmly. He physically guided her toward their car, but she kept shouting over her shoulder, "Everyone should know what you really are. Jenny, you're a cold, heartless woman who cares more about money than family." They drove away, but I knew this was just the beginning. Rachel had shown me something important in that outburst. She was willing to try to destroy my reputation in the neighborhood, to make me look like the villain in this situation, but she had no idea what I was prepared to do in response. That afternoon, I paid a visit to Mrs. Patterson. She answered the door hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable about the morning's drama. "Jenny, I'm sorry about what happened in your driveway. That must have been very difficult for you." "It was, Margaret, and I wanted to explain the situation so you'd understand what's really going on." I spent 20 minutes telling Mrs. Patterson the truth about Marcus and Rachel's financial irresponsibility, their lies, their manipulation attempts. I showed her some of the documents I'd collected, the evidence of their spending, their real income level. "So you see," I concluded, "this isn't about me being cruel to family, this is about refusing to enable people who have been lying to me and taking advantage of me for years." Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically. I had wondered how they could afford such an expensive house on their salary, and Rachel's car is certainly more luxury than I could ever afford. I made similar visits to 3 other neighbors that day, calmly explaining the situation and providing context for what they'd witnessed. By evening, the neighborhood had a very different understanding of the morning's drama, but Marcus and Rachel weren't done. That night, they tried a different approach. At 9 p.m., my doorbell rang. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a young woman I didn't recognize holding a small child. I opened the door cautiously. "Are you Jennifer Davis?" the woman asked. "Yeah, I'm Sarah, Marcus's cousin. This is my daughter Emma." She gestured to the little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. "Marcus called me and told me what's happening. I can't believe you're throwing him out of his house." I studied the woman carefully. I'd never heard Marcus mention a cousin named Sarah, and something about this felt staged. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've ever met. How exactly are you related to Marcus? Through his father's side. We've been close since we were kids. The little girl started to cry, and Sarah bounced her gently. Emma here has been looking forward to playing with Uncle Marcus and Aunt Rachel at their beautiful house. She doesn't understand why Grandma Jenny is being so mean. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. A convenient cousin I'd never heard of, with a small child who would supposedly be hurt by my actions. They'd clearly coached this woman on what to say, probably paid her to come to my door with her child as a prop. Sarah, I appreciate you coming by, but this is a private family matter. Marcus and Rachel need to find housing they can actually afford, but where will they go? They have nowhere else. They'll figure it out. They're adults. But what about little Emma? She loves visiting their house. I looked down at the child who had stopped crying and was now looking around my front porch with obvious curiosity. She didn't seem distressed about any housing situation. I'm sure Emma will be just as happy visiting Marcus and Rachel wherever they end up living. Sarah's expression hardened slightly, and I realized I'd called their bluff. You really don't care about anyone but yourself, do you? I care about honesty, responsibility, and treating people with respect. Marcus and Rachel have shown me that they're incapable of all three. They're desperate, Jennifer. People say things they don't mean when they're desperate. They said exactly what they meant. They just didn't expect there to be consequences. Sarah turned to leave, then looked back at me. I hope you can live with yourself, knowing you destroyed your son's life over money. My son destroyed his own life with his choices. I'm just refusing to fix it for him. After they left, I called Harold and told him about the visit. He wasn't surprised. They're getting desperate, he said. This kind of manipulation is common when people are facing eviction. They'll try anything to make you feel guilty enough to change your mind. What should I expect next? Probably more dramatic visits. Maybe some social media campaigns, trying to make you look bad, possibly even attempts to damage the property out of spite. I'd recommend installing security cameras if you haven't already. I took Harold's advice. The next morning, I had a security system installed at my house, and at 20E47 Maple Ridge Drive. I wanted video evidence of everything that happened from this point forward. I was glad I did, because things were about to get much worse. The social media campaign started 2 days later. Rachel had created a Facebook post titled "How My Mother-in-Law Destroyed Our Family" and shared it in multiple local community groups. The post was a masterwork of manipulation, painting me as a heartless landlord who had deliberately bought their house to punish them for some unnamed slut. My husband's mother has decided to evict us from our home, the post read. She bought our house at auction without telling us, and now she's throwing us out on the street. We have nowhere to go and no money for deposits or moving expenses. This woman claims to be a Christian and a loving mother, but she's destroying her own family over money. Please share this post, so people know what kind of person she really is. The post included photos of their house, pictures of Marcus as a child, and even a photo of me that they'd taken without my knowledge. Within hours it had been shared dozens of times, with comments ranging from sympathy to outrage. This is horrible. How can a mother do this to her own child? Some people care more about money than family. Disgusting. There must be more to this story. Nobody just evicts their own son for no reason. That last comment gave me hope that not everyone was buying their version of events. But the worst part wasn't the social media campaign itself. It was Marcus's response to it. When I called him to demand that he take down the post, his answer shocked me. "I didn't write it, Mom. That was all Rachel, but you approved it. You're okay with her lying about me publicly?" "She's not lying. You are evicting us. She's lying about the context, Marcus. She's making it sound like I bought your house specifically to hurt you when the truth is that you lost your house because you couldn't afford it. Does it matter? The result is the same." It matters because it's the difference between truth and manipulation. But then again, you've never seemed to care much about that distinction. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've been lying to me for months about your financial situation, and now you're allowing your wife to lie about me publicly. Apparently dishonesty runs in your family now. We're not dishonest, Mom. We're Desperation doesn't excuse deception, Marcus. It reveals character. I hung up and immediately called Harold. Within 2 hours, he'd sent a cease and desist letter to both Marcus and Rachel, demanding that they remove the defamatory social media posts or face legal action. The post came down that evening, but the damage was done. Screenshots had been saved and shared, and my reputation in several local Facebook groups had been seriously damaged. But I wasn't defenseless. I had my own strategy. The next morning, I created my own Facebook post in the same community groups. I titled it, "The Other Side of the Story," and told the truth about what had happened, backed up with documentation. Yesterday, someone posted a story about me that was full of lies and manipulation. I wrote, "I normally don't air family business in public, but since my reputation has been attacked, I feel I need to set the record straight." I included screenshots of Marcus and Rachel's credit card statements, their social media posts, showing off expensive purchases, and the text messages they'd sent me demanding money. I documented their lies about their income and employment status, their debt accumulation, their attempt to manipulate me into co-signing loans. This isn't about a heartless mother evicting her son, I concluded. This is about adults facing the consequences of their financial irresponsibility. I've supported my son his entire life, including paying for his education and helping with numerous financial emergencies. But I draw the line at enabling continued irresponsible behavior and being lied to and manipulated. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive. Comments poured in from people who had dealt with similar situations, who understood the difference between helping family and enabling destructive behavior. Good for you for standing your ground. Some people think family means never having to face consequences for their action. I've been in a similar situation. Sometimes tough love is the only thing that works. But the comment that meant the most to me came from Mrs. Patterson. I've been Jenny's neighbor for 8 years, and she's one of the most generous, hardworking people I know. She's always been there for her son, but no one should have to tolerate being lied to and disrespected. Marcus called me within an hour of my post going live. "Mom, how could you do this? How could you put our private business out there for everyone to see? The same way you and Rachel did when you decided to attack my character publicly. That was different. We were asking for help. You were lying about me to manipulate public sympathy. I simply told the truth. You posted our financial information. That's private. You made it public when you decided to lie about why you're being evicted. If you didn't want people to know about your financial irresponsibility, you shouldn't have tried to blame me for it. This is going to ruin us, Mom. Everyone will know about our debt, our spending. How are we supposed to face people? The same way you expected me to face people after you called me a heartless mother who cares more about money than family." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want from us, Mom? What will it take for you to forgive us and work with us on this?" And that's when I realized that he still didn't understand. Even after everything that had happened, all the lies and manipulation and public attacks, he still thought this was about forgiveness. He still thought he could find the right words, the right approach, the right manipulation, to get what he wanted. He still didn't understand that this wasn't about punishment, or revenge, or forgiveness. This was about consequence. "Marcus, I want you to move out of my property by the date specified in the eviction notice. I want you to find housing you can actually afford. I want you to learn to live within your means. And I want you to stop lying to people about why this is happening. And then we can have a relationship again." I don't know, Marcus. That depends on whether you're capable of change, whether you can learn to be honest and responsible, whether you can treat people with respect. Of course I can change. You've had 30 years to change, Marcus. You've had months to handle this situation responsibly. You've had weeks to be honest with me about your finances. Instead, you've lied, manipulated, and attacked my character. I'm not holding my breath waiting for you to suddenly develop integrity. So you're just giving up on me. I'm giving up on enabling you. There's a difference. I hung up and looked around my small, comfortable house. In 2 weeks, Marcus and Rachel would be out of 247 Maple Ridge Drive, and I would have a beautiful rental property in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. More importantly, I would be free from their manipulation, their lies, their constant demands for money to fund their irresponsible lifestyle. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future, but I should have known that Marcus and Rachel had one more card to play. The final card came in the form of my granddaughter. I was in my kitchen making coffee on a quiet Sunday morning when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the window I saw Marcus walking toward my front door, but he wasn't alone. He was holding the hand of a little girl I'd never seen before, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with blonde pigtails and a pink dress. My heart stopped for a moment, thinking somehow Marcus and Rachel had had a child without telling me, but as they got closer, I realized this wasn't their daughter. This child looked nothing like either of them, and Marcus was holding her hand awkwardly, like he wasn't used to being around children. The doorbell rang and I opened it to find Marcus with what was obviously a coached expression of desperation on his face. "Mom, I'd like you to meet Emma," he said, gesturing to the little girl. "She's Rachel's niece, and she's been staying with us while her parents go through a difficult divorce." The child looked up at me with wide blue eyes and said, in a voice that was clearly rehearsed, "Are you the mean lady who's making Uncle Marcus and Aunt Rachel move away?" I stared at my son in disbelief. They had brought a child, someone else's child, to use as an emotional weapon against me. "Marcus, what is this?" "This is Emma, and she's been living with us for the past 3 months while her parents sort out their custody situation. If we get evicted, she'll have nowhere to go." The little girl stepped forward and handed me a drawing she'd been holding. It showed stick figures of what appeared to be a family standing in front of a house, with a dark figure off to the side. That was presumably me. "I drew this for you," she said. "It's our family at the pretty house. Rachel says you want to take our house away." I knelt down to the child's level, speaking gently. "Sweetie, what's your mommy's name?" "Jessica," she said without hesitation. "And where does mommy live?" The little girl pointed down the street. "The blue house with the fence." I stood up and looked at Marcus with a mixture of fury and disgust. "You brought this child from down the street to lie to me?" Marcus's face flushed. "It's not a lie, Mom. She has been staying with us sometimes while her parents work out their problem." "Sometimes is not the same as living with you, Marcus. And using a child to manipulate me is the lowest thing you've done yet." "I'm not using her. I'm trying to show you that our situation affects more than just us." I looked down at the little girl, who was starting to look confused and upset by the tension between the adults. "Emma, honey, do you know where you live?" "With mommy in the blue house," she said. "That's right, and mommy is at home waiting for you, isn't she?" Emma nodded. I took her small hand gently. "Let's walk down to your house, so you can go home to mommy, okay?" "But what about Uncle Marcus and Aunt Rachel?" she asked, looking back at Marcus. "They'll be fine, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to move to new houses, but that doesn't mean anything bad is happening." As we walked down the street, Marcus following behind us, I could see a woman in the front yard of the blue house. She looked up as we approached, and her expression immediately changed from casual curiosity to alarm. "Emma, there you are," she called out, hurrying toward us. "I was wondering where you'd gone." "Hi, Mommy. I went to see the mean lady, but she's not really mean." The woman, who was clearly Emma's mother, looked at Marcus with obvious confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." Emma said she was going to visit a neighbor. "I'm Jennifer Davis," I said, extending my hand. "I believe Marcus here asked to borrow your daughter for a few minutes to help him with a family matter." The woman's eyes narrowed as she looked at Marcus. "You asked my 5-year-old daughter to help you with a family matter?" Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear. "It wasn't like that. Emma just wanted to meet my mother, and I thought, you thought you'd use my child to manipulate your mother." The woman's voice was rising. "Are you insane?" Emma was now clinging to her mother's leg, clearly sensing that something was wrong. I knelt down next to her again. "Emma, you did nothing wrong, okay? Sometimes adults make poor choices, but that's not your fault." I stood up and looked at Marcus. "Apologize to this woman for involving her daughter in your scheme." "It wasn't a scheme, Mom." "Apologize, Mark." He mumbled something that might have been an apology and walked away quickly. Wazamaza watched him go, then turned to me. I am so sorry about this. I had no idea what he was planning when he knocked on my door this morning. It's not your fault. Thank you for letting me walk Emma home. As I walked back to my house, I felt something I hadn't felt before in this entire situation: genuine anger. Not hurt, not disappointment, but pure, clean anger at what Marcus had just attempted to do. Using a child as a prop in his manipulation game was a line I hadn't expected him to cross. It showed me that there was literally no depth to which he wouldn't sink to avoid taking responsibility for his actions. I went inside and immediately called Harold. They just tried to use a neighbor's 5-year-old daughter to manipulate me, I told him. They coached a child to call me mean, and to give me a drawing about taking away their house. Harold was quiet for a moment. Jenny, I think we need to consider accelerating the eviction timeline. This behavior is escalating beyond normal desperation. What do you mean? I mean they're becoming unhinged. Using a child in their manipulation attempts suggests they're not thinking clearly anymore. I'm concerned about what they might do as the eviction date gets closer. You think they might damage the property? I think they might do any number of things. False accusations, property damage, harassment of your other tenants, interference with your business. When people get this desperate, they often lash out in unpredictable ways. Harold was right to be concerned. Over the next few days, Marcus and Rachel's behavior became increasingly erratic and vindictive. First, they started parking outside my house at odd hours. I would look out my window at midnight and see their car across the street, just sitting there with the engine running. When I called the police to report suspicious activity, they would drive away before the officers arrived. Then they began calling my other tenants, trying to turn them against me. Rachel somehow got the phone number for Miss Chin, who rented one of my duplexes, and told her that I was an abusive landlord who evicted people without cause. Mrs. Chin called me, confused and upset, because she'd always found me to be responsive and fair. Miss Davis, someone called me and said, "You were going to raise everyone's rent by 50% next month. Is this true?" "Of course not, Mrs. Chin. Someone is spreading false information about me. The woman said you threw your own son out of his house. That seems very hard." I spent 20 minutes explaining the real situation to Mrs. Chin, but I realized I was going to have to do the same thing with all 15 of my tenants. Rachel was systematically trying to destroy my rental business by spreading lies about my character and my practices. I called each tenant personally and sent them all a letter explaining that someone was spreading false information about me and my business, and that they should disregard any calls or visits from people claiming to represent my interests. But the worst incident happened on a Tuesday evening when I was showing one of my vacant properties to a potential new tenant. I was walking through the 2-bedroom apartment with a young couple who seemed very interested in renting it. We were discussing lease terms and move-in dates when my phone started buzzing with text messages. I ignored them at first, but they kept coming, one after another. Finally, I excused myself and checked my phone. The messages were all from unknown numbers, but they were clearly coordinated. "You're a terrible landlord who evicts families. Don't rent from Jennifer Davis. She has no conscience. This woman throws her own son out on the street. Jennifer Davis cares more about money than human decency." Someone had posted my phone number online, along with instructions to text me about my heartless treatment of my son. Within minutes I had received over 30 messages from strangers who had been given a completely false version of the story. The young couple I was showing the apartment to could see that something was wrong. "Is everything okay?" the woman asked. "I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to cut this short. Someone is harassing me with false information, and I need to deal with." They left quickly, obviously uncomfortable with being in the middle of whatever drama was unfolding. I lost a good potential tenant because of Marcus and Rachel's vindictive behavior. That night, I sat in my home office and made a decision. I was done being reactive to their attack. It was time to take control of this situation completely. I opened my laptop and began researching every aspect of Marcus and Rachel's lives that I could legally access. Public records, social media accounts, employment information, credit reports, legal filing. If they wanted to play dirty, I was going to show them what dirty really looked like. What I found was even worse than I'd suspected. Rachel had been lying to me about more than just her employment status. She'd been running up credit card debt for 5 years, not 2. She'd had 3 previous credit cards that had been charged off by other banks. She'd defaulted on a car loan in 2019. Her financial irresponsibility went back much further than their current crisis. But Marcus was the bigger shock. I discovered that he'd been borrowing money from multiple payday loan companies, hiding the debt from Rachel. He'd taken out cash advances against his credit cards and used the money for online gambling. In the past year alone, he'd lost over $20,000 on sports betting sites. My son had a gambling addiction that he'd been hiding from everyone, including his wife. I printed out everything I'd found and put it in a folder. Then I did something I'd never done before in my life. I hired a private investigator. I need to know everything about these 2 people, I told the investigator, a woman named Carol Martinez, who came highly recommended by Harold. Their real income, their real debts, their real activities. I need to know what they're not telling me. Carol reviewed the information I'd already gathered. This is a good start, but I can go much deeper. Employment verification, spending patterns, social connections, any legal issues. How far do you want me to go? I want to know everything. I want to know who they really are, not who they've been pretending to be. This could get expensive. I don't care about the cost. I need the truth. Carol's investigation took 2 weeks, and what she found was devastating. Rachel had been having an affair with her boss at the furniture store for 8 months. She'd been using company credit cards for personal purchases and funneling money from the store's petty cash fund. Her promotion to assistant manager had been a way for her boss to cover up the theft and give her access to more money. Marcus's gambling addiction was worse than I'd thought. He'd been betting on everything: sports, poker games, even online slot machines. He borrowed money from loan sharks when the payday loans weren't enough. He was into illegal bookmakers for nearly $50,000, which explained why they were so desperate for money and so willing to manipulate me. But the most shocking discovery was that they'd been planning to scam me for months. Carol had found text messages between Marcus and Rachel discussing how to approach me for money. They'd researched the value of my properties and calculated how much I was worth. They'd planned the dinner conversation, deciding what lies to tell and how to make me feel guilty for having money while they struggled. The text exchange from 2 months before our dinner was particularly damning. Rachel, your mom has to be worth at least $2 million with all those properties. We need to figure out how to get her to help us. Marcus, she's always been tight with money. We'll have to make her feel guilty about it. Rachel, what if we tell her we're going to lose the house? She won't let her son become homeless. Marcus, good idea. And we should make it seem like it's not our fault. Bad economy, pay cuts, unexpected expenses. Rachel, perfect. And if she hesitates, I'll make her feel like a bad mother. That always works with guilty parents. I read that exchange 5 times, each time feeling more betrayed and more disgusted. They had deliberately planned to lie to me, to manipulate my emotions, to exploit my love for my son, to steal my money. Everything they'd said to me, every tear Rachel had shed, every desperate plea Marcus had made, it had all been calculated manipulation. But Carol had found something else, something that changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Your son has been stealing from you, she told me when she delivered her final report. Small amounts, over several years, but it adds up to a significant sum. She showed me bank records that proved Marcus had been using my personal information to open credit cards and take out small loans. He'd been intercepting mail, addressed to me, and redirecting financial documents to a post office box he'd rented. He'd even filed a fraudulent tax return in my name and kept the refund. We're talking about identity theft, wire fraud, and tax fraud, Carol said. These are federal crimes. I stared at the evidence, my hands shaking. My son hadn't just lied to me and manipulated me. He'd been systematically stealing from me for years. How much? I asked. Based on what I could track, approximately $37,000. But there might be more that's harder to trace. $37,000. Nearly $40,000 stolen from me by my own son, the person I'd sacrificed everything for, the person I'd trusted completely. That night, I sat in my kitchen with all of Carol's findings spread out on the table. Bank records, text messages, credit reports, photographs, employment records. the complete truth about Marcus and Rachel Bell. I thought about the dinner where they'd called me worthless. I thought about their demands that I co-sign for their loan. I thought about their social media attacks on my character. I thought about their attempts to turn my neighbors and tenants against me. I thought about them using a child to manipulate me, and I realized that they weren't just irresponsible or desperate, they were criminal. They had been planning to defraud me out of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and when that failed, they'd escalated to harassment, stalking, and defamation. But they'd made one crucial mistake: they'd underestimated me. I picked up my phone and called Harold. "I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning," I told him, "and I need you to contact the FBI. We're going to be filing criminal charges, against Marcus, against both of them. Identity theft, wire fraud, tax fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, harassment, stalking, defamation. I want them prosecuted to the full extent of the law." Harold was quiet for a moment. "Jenny, are you sure about this? Once you file criminal charges against your son, there's no going back." "Harold, they've been stealing from me for years. They planned an elaborate scheme to defraud me out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. They've been harassing me, stalking me, and trying to destroy my business. If they weren't my son and daughter-in-law, would you hesitate to prosecute?" "No, I wouldn't." "Then don't hesitate now. They've shown me exactly who they are, and I'm done pretending they're anything other than criminals." The next morning, I walked into Harold's office with 3 folders full of evidence. By the end of the day, we'd filed a comprehensive criminal complaint with the FBI, civil lawsuits for defamation and harassment, and a formal fraud report with the IRS. But I wasn't done yet. I'd spent 30 years building a real estate empire through hard work, careful planning, and strategic thinking. Now I was going to use those same skills to systematically dismantle everything Marcus and Rachel thought they could take from me. Step 1 was the house at 208047 Maple Ridge Drive. Instead of simply evicting them and finding new tenants, I decided to sell the property, but not to just anyone, to the one buyer who would cause them the maximum amount of discomfort. I called Rachel's boss at the furniture store, the man she'd been having an affair with and stealing money from. His name was David Kim, and according to Carol's investigation, he'd been looking for a house in the Meadowbrook Estates neighborhood for months. "Mr. Kim, my name is Jennifer Davis, and I understand you've been house hunting in Meadowbrook Estates." "Yes, that's right. Do you have a property for sale?" "I do. A beautiful 4-bedroom colonial at 208047 Maple Ridge Drive. Are you familiar with the address?" There was a pause. That's where Rachel Bell lives." "Not for much longer. The current tenants are being evicted, and I'm looking for a cash buyer who can close quickly." "I see. And you're sure the current tenants will be gone?" "Mr. Kim, I think you and I should meet in person. I have some information that might be very relevant to your situation." We met that afternoon at a coffee shop near the furniture store. I brought a folder containing evidence of Rachel's theft from the company and her affair with Kim. I laid it out on the table between us like a business proposal. "Mr. Kim, I know about Rachel's financial activities at your store. I know about the missing money, the unauthorized credit card use, the petty cash discrepancies. I also know about your personal relationship with her." Kim's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. And I think you're going to want to hear my proposition." I leaned forward. "I'm prepared to sell you the house at 208047 Maple Ridge Drive for $50,000 below market value. Cash sale, quick closing, no inspections or contingencies." "Why would you do that?" "Because I want Rachel Bell to know that her actions have consequences. I want her to watch from the sidewalk as you move into the house she thought she was entitled to keep." Kim was quiet for a long moment, processing what I was offering him. "What about Rachel? What about our situation?" "That's between you and her, Mr. Kim. But I would suggest that you might want to reconsider any business or personal relationships with someone who steals from her employers and lies our family. You're asking me to betray her. I'm asking you to protect yourself. Rachel is about to be charged with multiple felonies. Her theft from your store is going to come to light during the investigation. You can either be seen as another victim of her crimes, Or you can be seen as an accomplice. I slid a business card across the table. Think about it, Mr. Kim. You have 24 hours to decide. He called me the next morning and agreed to buy the house. Step 2 was Rachel's job. I called the owner of the furniture store chain, Richard Chen, and requested a meeting. Mr. Chen was a businessman who'd built his company through careful attention to detail and zero tolerance for theft. Chen, I have evidence that one of your employees has been embezzling money from your stores. I presented the same evidence I'd shown Kim, along with additional documentation Carol had uncovered about the scope of Rachel's theft. This employee has stolen approximately $15,000 from your company over the past 8 months. I told him. She's been using company credit cards for personal purchases, taking money from petty cash, and falsifying inventory records to cover her tracks. Ms. Chen reviewed the evidence carefully. This is very serious. Why are you bringing this to me instead of the police? I'm bringing it to you first, because I believe you deserve to know before this becomes a criminal matter, but I will be filing a police report this afternoon. Who is the employee? Rachel Bell, assistant manager at your downtown location. Mr. Chen nodded grimly. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. She'll be terminated immediately, and we'll be pursuing our own legal action against her. Step 3 was Marcus's job. This one was more delicate, because Marcus actually was a good employee when he wasn't gambling away his salary, but his gambling debts had made him a liability to his company, especially once I revealed what I knew about his borrowing from loan sharks. I called Marcus's supervisor and requested a confidential meeting. I'm calling because I'm concerned about Marcus Bell's financial situation and how it might affect his work performance or the company's security. I explained about the gambling addiction, the debts to illegal bookmakers, the identity theft, the fraud. I didn't ask them to fire Marcus, but I made it clear that he was a security risk who could potentially be compromised by people trying to collect his debt. We appreciate you bringing this to our attention, his supervisor said. We'll handle this appropriately. Marcus was placed on administrative leave the next day, pending a security review. By the end of the week, Marcus and Rachel had lost their house, their jobs, and their income. They were facing federal criminal charges and multiple civil lawsuits. Their landlord references were destroyed, their credit was ruined, and their savings were gone. But I still wasn't finished. The final step was the most important one. Making sure they understood that their actions had consequences not just for them, but for everyone around them. I'd kept in touch with Emma's mother, the neighbor whose daughter they'd tried to use to manipulate me. Her name was Jessica, and she was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her daughter. Jessica, I have a proposition for you. I told her when I called. How would you feel about a significant upgrade in your living situation? What do you mean? I mean a 4-bedroom house in Meadowbrook Estates, rent-free for 6 months while you get back on your feet. Jessica was quiet for a moment. I don't understand. Why would you offer me that? Because you're a good mother who's working hard to provide for your daughter, because you deserve better than you have, and because I want Emma to have the house that Marcus and Rachel thought they were entitled to. But I can't afford the rent on a house like that. Even after 6 months, the rent will be $800 a month after the first 6 months. Half of what comparable houses cost in that neighborhood. Why would you do this for us? Because kindness should be rewarded, Jessica, and because sometimes the best revenge is giving good things to good people. Jessica and Emma moved into 2847 Maple Ridge Drive 2 weeks after Marcus and Rachel were evicted. I hired a landscaping company to make the yard perfect for a little girl with a swing set and a sandbox and a flower garden she could help tend. The day they moved in, I drove by the house and saw Emma playing in the front yard, laughing and chasing bubbles while her mother unpacked boxes. It was the first time in months that the house had seen genuine happiness. That evening, Marcus called me. His voice was hollow, defeated. Mom, we lost everything. The house, our jobs, our savings. We're staying in a motel room, and we don't know what we're going to do. I know. You know, how do you know? Because I made it happen, Marcus. There was a long silence. Then he said, What? I sold the house to Rachel's boss. I reported Rachel's theft to her employer. I informed your company about your gambling debts and criminal activities. I orchestrated every single thing that's happened to you this week. But why? Because you called me worthless, Marcus. Because you tried to steal from me. Because you thought you could manipulate and lie and cheat your way through life without consequences. Because you forgot that I didn't build what I have by being weak or naive or forgiving. Mom, please, we need help. You need to face the consequences of your action. You need to learn that choices have results. You need to understand that the woman you called worthless just dismantled your entire life in less than a week. We're going to be homeless. Then you'll learn what homelessness feels like. Maybe it will teach you to appreciate having a home when you finally earn one again. Please, Mom, I'm begging you. You should have thought about that before you decided I was worthless. I hung up and looked around my small, comfortable house. Tomorrow, I would start looking for my next investment property, maybe a nice duplex or a small apartment building. I had the money from the sale of 2847 Maple Ridge Drive, and I had decades of experience in real estate, but most importantly, I had my self-respect back. I had spent 30 years sacrificing for a son who saw me as nothing more than a source of money to fund his irresponsible lifestyle. I had allowed him and his wife to manipulate me, lie to me, and attack my character. But I had also just proven to myself that I was far from worthless. I was a woman who had built an empire from nothing. I was a strategist who could outmaneuver people half my age. I was someone who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable destructive behavior. I was Jennifer Davis, and I was nobody's victim, not anymore. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office, overlooking the Harbor District, when Harold called with news about the criminal case. The federal prosecutor accepted their plea deals, he told me. Marcus pled guilty to identity theft and wire fraud. He'll serve 18 months in federal prison and pay full restitution. Rachel pled guilty to embezzlement and conspiracy charges. She'll serve 12 months and has to pay back everything she stole from both you and the furniture store. I set down my coffee and looked out at the water. What about the civil suits? They'll pay damages for the harassment and defamation, plus attorney fees. The total judgment is $230,000, which they don't have now, but the judgment is valid for 20 years, and it can be renewed. If they ever have assets or income above subsistence level, you can garnish it. I thanked Harold and hung up. The legal resolution felt almost anticlimactic after everything that had happened. Justice through the court system was thorough but slow, clinical but impersonal. The real resolution had happened months ago when I'd chosen to stop being their victim. The past 6 months had been the most productive period of my life. After selling 2847 Maple Ridge Drive and liquidating a few other properties, I'd used the capital to expand into commercial real estate. I'd purchased a small office building in the Harbor District and converted the top floor into my headquarters for Davis Property Management. My business had grown beyond simple rental property. I now managed real estate investments for other people, helped first-time buyers navigate the market, and consulted with developers on residential projects. The woman who Marcus and Rachel had called a small-time landlord with a hobby was now running $1 million real estate company. But the professional success wasn't the most satisfying part of my new life. The most satisfying part was the peace I felt every morning when I woke up in my beautiful new apartment, overlooking the harbor. I'd finally bought myself something not just functional, not just practical, but genuinely beautiful. A 2-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a gourmet kitchen, and a balcony where I could watch the sunrise over the water. For 30 years I'd lived modestly while building my portfolio. Now I was allowing myself to enjoy the fruits of my labor. The apartment was furnished with pieces I'd chosen carefully, things that reflected my taste rather than just my budget. A comfortable reading chair by the window, a dining table where I could spread out paperwork or host dinner parties, artwork that made me smile when I looked at it. I'd also made new friends, something I'd neglected during the years when I was focused on work and family obligations. My neighbor across the hall was a retired teacher named Patricia, who shared my love of old movies and good wine. The woman who ran the coffee shop downstairs had become a friend who saved me fresh pastries and local gossip. I joined a book club, started taking piano lessons, and begun volunteering at a literacy center downtown. For the first time since George died, I felt like I had a social life that belonged to me, not built around my son's needs or schedule. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. For the first few weeks after the eviction, I'd felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that the manipulation and harassment had stopped, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also a deep sadness about the loss of the relationship I'd thought I had with Marcus. I'd grieved for the son I'd raised, the boy who used to help me paint apartments, and who'd been proud of my first real estate purchase. That person had either never really existed, or had been corrupted somewhere along the way by entitlement and poor choices. Either way, he was gone, and I'd had to accept that loss before I could move forward. The grieving process had been complicated by well-meaning friends and neighbors who thought I should forgive Marcus, and Rachel, who believed that family relationships were worth preserving regardless of behavior. "But he's your only child," Mrs. Patterson had said when I'd told her about the criminal charges. "Don't you think you're being a little harsh, Margaret? If a stranger had stolen $40,000 from you, would you press charges?" "Of course." "Then why should family members be held to a lower standard than strangers?" "Because family is supposed to forgive each other. Forgiveness doesn't mean enabling continued bad behavior, and it doesn't mean pretending that crimes aren't crimes just because they're committed by relatives." Those conversations had been difficult, but they'd helped me clarify my own thinking. I wasn't being vindictive or cruel. I was simply refusing to be victimized by people who had shown me repeatedly that they had no respect for me or intention of changing their behavior. The decision became easier as I learned more about their lives after the eviction. Through mutual acquaintances and public records, I'd kept track of what happened to Marcus and Rachel after they lost everything. Initially, they'd moved in with Rachel's parents, who lived in a modest ranch house about an hour outside the city. But that arrangement lasted only 6 weeks before Rachel's parents kicked them out. Apparently, Marcus and Rachel had tried to manipulate Rachel's elderly parents the same way they'd tried to manipulate me, demanding money and making unreasonable demands while contributing nothing to the household. After that, they'd bounced between cheap motels and short-term rentals, never staying anywhere long because they couldn't afford deposits or because they'd cause problems with other tenants. Rachel had tried to get another job in retail, but her theft conviction made her unemployable in any position involving money or merchandise. Marcus had attempted to work construction and delivery jobs, but his gambling addiction hadn't disappeared just because he'd lost his house. He'd blow whatever money he earned on sports bets or online poker, leaving them unable to pay rent or buy groceries. Their relationship had deteriorated rapidly under the stress. According to the private investigator I'd hired to monitor their activities for safety reasons, they'd been arrested twice for domestic disturbances in motel parking lots. Rachel had filed for divorce, then withdrawn the petition, then filed again. They were living exactly the kind of chaotic, unstable life that people create when they refuse to take responsibility for their choices and learn from their mistakes. But the most telling detail came from Jessica, Emma's mother, who was thriving in the house at 20. "I saw your son and his wife at the grocery store last week," Jessica told me during one of our monthly check-ins. "They were in line ahead of me, and I overheard their conversation. They were arguing about whether they could afford to buy milk, and Rachel said something about how this was all your fault, how you'd ruined their lives for no reason. He said you'd been right about them living beyond their means, and that maybe they should have listened to you instead of attacking you." Rachel got furious and said he was being brainwashed by his crazy mother. I wasn't surprised by Rachel's reaction, but Marcus's comment gave me a moment of hope that maybe he was finally developing some self-awareness. That hope was dashed 2 weeks later when he was arrested for check fraud, having written bad checks to pay gambling debt. Some people, I realized, are simply incapable of learning from their mistakes. They'll repeat the same destructive patterns over and over, always finding someone else to blame for the consequences of their choices. I'd spent 30 years trying to save Marcus from himself, and all I'd accomplished was enabling his irresponsible behavior while sacrificing my own happiness and security. The moment I stopped enabling him, he'd shown his true character by trying to steal from me and destroy my reputation. Now, 6 months later, I could see clearly that cutting ties with Marcus and Rachel was the best decision I'd ever made. Without their constant drama and financial demands, I'd been able to focus on building something positive for myself. The success of Davis Property Management had attracted attention from other real estate professionals. I'd been invited to speak at industry conferences about property acquisition strategies and tenant relations. A local business magazine had featured me in an article about women entrepreneurs over 50 who were changing their industries. But perhaps the most rewarding recognition came from an unexpected source. The city's housing authority had approached me about developing affordable housing units for working families. They'd been impressed by my track record of maintaining quality properties while keeping rents reasonable for good tenants. "We need developers who understand that housing is about more than just profit margins," the housing director had told me. "We need people who care about building stable communities." The project would involve converting an old warehouse district into mixed-income housing, with some units rented at market rate and others subsidized for families like Jessica and Emma. It was exactly the kind of meaningful work I'd always wanted to do, but hadn't had the time or resources to pursue while I was dealing with Marcus's constant crises. As I reviewed the preliminary plans for the housing development, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to a year ago. Then I'd been a woman whose primary identity was being Marcus's mother, someone whose decisions were always filtered through the question of how they might affect my son. I'd lived small, saved compulsively, and denied myself pleasures because I thought I needed to be available to rescue Marcus from whatever trouble he created. Now I was Jennifer Davis, CEO of a successful real estate company, developer of affordable housing projects, and woman who'd built a life that reflected her own values and priorities. The transformation hadn't come without cost. I missed having family, missed the idea of grandchildren, missed the fantasy of holiday dinners and birthday celebrations with people who shared my history. But I didn't miss the anxiety of never knowing when the next crisis would hit, the exhaustion of constantly managing Marcus's emotions and problems, or the humiliation of being manipulated by people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. I'd traded a dysfunctional family relationship for peace, self-respect, and the freedom to build something meaningful with my time and energy. It had been a good trade. My phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia, my neighbor across the hall. "Wine and movie night at my place tonight. I found an old Cary Grant film you haven't seen." I texted back that I'd be there and smiled as I put my phone away. This was what friendship looked like when it wasn't based on obligation or manipulation. Patricia enjoyed my company, and I enjoyed her. We supported each other during difficult times, and celebrated each other's successes. Neither of us expected the other to solve our problems or fund our lifestyle choices. It was a simple concept that had taken me 60 years to truly understand. Healthy relationships are based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not need and obligation. As I was preparing to leave the office for the day, Harold called with one final update about the legal proceeding. "I thought you should know that Marcus tried to contact you through my office," he said. "He wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to meet with him before he reports to prison next month." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd pass along the message, but that I doubted you'd be interested in meeting." "You were right, I'm not interested." He said he wanted to apologize, to try to make things right between you. I considered this for a moment. There was a part of me, probably always would be, that wanted to believe Marcus was capable of genuine remorse and change, but I'd learned to distinguish between what I wanted to believe and what the evidence actually supported. "Harold, in your experience, when people facing prison time want to apologize to their victims, what are they usually hoping to accomplish?" "Usually they're hoping for a character reference letter to the judge, or for the victim to request a reduced sentence." "Exactly. Marcus doesn't want to apologize because he's genuinely sorry. He wants to apologize because he thinks it might help him avoid the full consequences of his actions. So no meeting, no letters, no contact of any kind. Marcus made his choices, and now he gets to live with the results. After I hung up, I sat quietly in my office for a few minutes, looking out at the harbor. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and orange. Boats were returning to the marina after a day on the water, their lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. I thought about the last conversation I'd had with Marcus, when he'd called me worthless. At the time, those words had cut deep, because some part of me had wondered if they might be true. Had I been selfish, hoarding money while my son struggled? Had I failed as a mother by not giving him everything he wanted? Now I knew better. I hadn't been worthless. I'd been valuable enough that Marcus and Rachel had spent months planning how to manipulate me out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I hadn't been selfish. I'd been building something substantial that could provide security for generations. I hadn't failed as a mother. I'd raised a son who'd had every opportunity to become a responsible adult, but had chosen a different path. The failure hadn't been mine. It had been Marcus's failure to appreciate what he'd been given, to learn from his mistakes, to treat other people with respect and honesty. But his failure had led to my liberation. If Marcus had been the son I'd hoped he was, I might have spent the rest of my life in the same small house, living modestly and waiting for his next crisis. I might never have challenged myself to expand my business, to take risks, to build something bigger than what I'd already accomplished. In a strange way, Marcus calling me worthless had been the wake-up call I'd needed to remember my own value. I locked up the office and walked downstairs to the coffee shop, where Maria was closing up for the day. "How was your day, Jenny?" she asked, wiping down the counter. "Productive," I said. "And yours?" "Good, busy. I had a young couple come in this morning, asking about the apartment upstairs. Are you still looking for tenants?" "Actually, yes." "Did they seem like good candidates?" "Very nice people. She's a nurse. He's a teacher." "They said they'd been looking for months, but everything's either too expensive, or in bad neighborhoods." "Have them call me tomorrow. I'd like to meet them." This was another change in my life. I'd become more selective about my tenants, but also more generous with good people. Instead of simply renting to whoever could pay the highest amount, I now prioritized character and stability. I'd rather rent to a teacher and a nurse at slightly below market rate, than to people who might cause problems or fail to pay rent. It was a luxury I could afford now that I wasn't supporting Marcus's irresponsible lifestyle. As I walked home along the harbor, I thought about the housing development project, and the difference it would make for families like Jessica and Emma. Quality, affordable housing in a safe neighborhood, with playgrounds and good schools nearby, the kind of community where children could grow up with stability and opportunities. It was the kind of meaningful work that felt like a legacy, something that would matter long after I was gone. When I reached my building, I found a package waiting for me at the front desk. It was from Jessica, with a note attached. "Emma made this for you at school. She wanted you to have it." Inside was a handmade card with a drawing of a house, and 2 stick figures. At the bottom, in careful first-grade handwriting, Emma had written, "Thank you for our pretty house. Love, Emma." I smiled and tucked the card into my purse. This was what family could look like. Not the dysfunctional blood relationships based on obligation and manipulation, but chosen connections based on genuine care and mutual respect. Emma would grow up in a stable home, with a mother who worked hard and made responsible choices. She would learn that kindness and integrity mattered more than appearances and that actions had consequences. She would probably never know that her house had once belonged to people who'd tried to steal and manipulate their way to success, but she would grow up understanding the values that actually created lasting happiness. In my apartment, I opened a bottle of wine and stood on my balcony watching the lights reflect on the water. Tomorrow I would review proposals for the housing development, meet with potential new tenants, and continue building the business I'd created from nothing. But tonight, I was simply going to enjoy the life I'd finally given myself permission to live. At 60 years old, I'd learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to refuse to be diminished by other people's dysfunction, to build something beautiful from the ashes of broken relationships. Marcus had called me worthless, but he'd been wrong about that too. I was worth exactly what I'd built with my own hands, my own mind, and my own determination to never again accept less than I deserved. And what I'd built was more valuable than he would ever understand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.